hopefully at this point, we have a pretty good understanding of the Vedas, which really mark the origin and the early formation of what we will call Hinduism. Right? As we move forward from the Vedas, which finish up at about 600 BCE or thereabouts, we see the continued development of Hinduism. Right? And as we get in a little bit closer to the Common Era, move from before the Common Era to the Common Era, we start to see more important texts and teachings show up within Hinduism. Remember that only the Vedas are considered Shruti, meaning that which is heard. Right? Remember that Shruti signifies a non-human origin, which gives the Vedas a kind of infallibility, a kind of perfection. And remember that all other texts, no matter how valuable they are to Hindus throughout history, are not classified as Shruti. Instead, they are classified as Smrti, the first term here that shows up on the screen. I know you might be wishing there were an extra vowel there. Again, we're dealing with transliteration from Sanskrit, for example, into English. And you can find different spellings of some of these key concepts depending on the scholars that are making use of these terms. So don't worry too much about the spelling. Try to sound out the term and do the best you can when trying to think about these key concepts from early Hinduism. But Smrti means that which is remembered, that which is remembered. This is different from Shruti, that which is heard. So clearly if Shruti, the Vedas, have a non-human origin, the idea is that the Smrti texts, even though they're very important, still have a human origin. And therefore, they can potentially be questioned or challenged in a way that generally Hindus would not question or challenge the Vedas, given their non-human origin and the perfection that is implied by that non-human origin. In terms of Smrti teachings, we have three primary types or groups of Smrti teachings, and they are typed out for you here. You begin with the epics, which we will talk about a little bit more through the rest of this particular video. And then the Puranas, which we won't say too much about in our introduction to Hinduism, but the Puranas are stories or tales of the gods and goddesses, kind of a different form of literature, a different idea of teachings, giving us all of these stories of the gods and goddesses that we worship. Remember, the early Vedas are not left behind just because the later Vedas turn toward a greater speculation about individual existence. Even as Hindus now seek moksha, one still seeks happiness and health and prosperity in this life. So the importance of the gods and the goddesses for this life especially will continue. And we'll actually see in future videos a new way in which particular gods and goddesses can actually assist us in our spiritual journey for moksha as well. So the Puranas are going to tell us all of these additional stories of the gods and goddesses to help us relate to those gods and goddesses, to learn more about them, to feel that we understand them and know the stories of them a little bit better. And then finally, you have the Dharma Shastras as kind of a third group of Smrti teachings. And we will see the Dharma Shastras are very interesting in the sense that portions of them have a great deal of importance for Hindus to this day. Other portions have been largely rejected, questioned, challenged, abandoned by many Hindus today, and maybe even back at the time when they should have been at their most important. Even then, much of what you find in the Dharma Shastras was challenged and rejected. So that's going to be an interesting group of teachings to study. But for now, let's say a little bit more about the epics, especially the first of the two great epics within Hinduism. The first of the great epics within Hinduism is the Ramayana. Sometimes you'll hear scholars describe or pronounce this the Ramayana. I think I've heard probably most scholars refer to this as the Ramayana. So get comfortable maybe with both pronunciations, as you might hear it pronounced differently in the future. But the Ramayana is the story of Ram, or sometimes Rama with an extra A on the end. But Ram, or Rama, is a prince, right? And the larger Ramayana is fairly lengthy, and it tells us about much of Ram's life from childhood up through marriage and all of this kind of stuff. But the key element of the story that tends to be the most important for Hinduism going forward has to do with the specific moment in which he is exiled from the kingdom, right? So his father is the king. His father had different wives throughout his life. Ram was obviously the son of one of those wives. At this moment in the story, another of the wives of the king kind of tricks the king into making a promise that will result in a sort of temporary exile for Ram from the kingdom, right? She's trying to put her own children up in the higher place, and Ram is seen as kind of the natural heir apparent to the throne. So the king is kind of tricked into making this promise, and then tells Ram about this promise that he has now made, that Ram now needs to be banished from the kingdom for a period of time. Ram responds by saying, "That's okay, Dad, because it is my dharma as a son to make sure that your promises are kept, to make sure to be obedient to your wishes, even if you were tricked into making this promise." So this is the first time that we have seen this word dharma, which shows up here toward the bottom of the screen. Dharma is defined in many different ways by scholars of Hinduism. Sometimes just one word is given, like law, or duty, or obligation, or morality. I want to think of it a little bit more clearly as relationship-specific moral obligation. So it is about morality, it is about ethics, but it's a relationship-specific moral obligation. Oftentimes in the West, not all the time, but oftentimes, we tend to think about ethics or morality as about universal rules. Right? Think within Judaism or Christianity, for example, thou shalt not X, Y, or Z. Right? It's not about an individual person not doing something given his or her status in life. No, thou shalt not. That applies to everybody seemingly for all times. That's kind of the way many of us understand ethics in the West through our religious and philosophical theories that have been put forward. Here in the Ramayana, we're not looking at universal moral norms so much as relationship-specific moral obligations. The idea is that I, for example, have many different dharmas. I have many different relationship-specific moral obligations. And they're not always the same, right? My dharma as a son is different from my dharma as a professor. I have different obligations to my parents than I do to my students. Right? My dharma as a brother is different from my dharma as a dog parent. Right? I have different obligations to my dog than I do to my brother. And the Ramayana recognizes what many of us might think of as kind of common sense, that we have very different moral obligations given our different relationships. So here Ram is saying, my dharma as a son is to fulfill your wishes no matter what, to his father, right? So we start to think about dharma in this way. You'll eventually kind of see here as we work our way through this story how and why these epics are seen as so important for most Hindus throughout time. We saw the Vedas. We saw that they are very confusing, especially the Upanishads, right? What is this transformative experiential wisdom about the relationship between Atman and Brahman? That's pretty confusing. The average Hindu throughout time doesn't really know how to even begin to embark on that kind of a spiritual quest. But the average Hindu can certainly read this really great story about Prince Ram and learn lessons about how we should live our daily lives. And if fulfilling our dharma can at least give us good karma to assist us in our future lifetimes, then at least we're moving in the right direction. So here in the epics, you have a kind of accessibility to all Hindus in the way in which we can at least make some spiritual progress, even if we aren't expecting an entire experience of moksha at the end of this given lifetime. We can at least learn stories about how to live by reading and hearing these epics. So Ram then goes into his period of exile. One of his other brothers goes with him, and his wife, Sita, accompanies him. She says, look, it is my dharma as a wife to stay with my husband, right? So here again, she's thinking of dharma, but her own dharma in this case as the wife of Ram. So she goes with him as well. Some of the servants go with them, and they go out into their period of banishment. As they're on their way into exile, the king dies. The brother who was kind of left behind in charge in case something would happen runs after Ram and says, hey, you don't need to go into exile anymore. Dad died. And Ram says, no, it is still my dharma to fulfill this period of banishment. right? So he continues into this time of exile. While in exile, right, a deer appears, and Ram and his brother and some of the other servants go on a hunting expedition to hunt the deer. And at that point, Ravana, the third name here given, Ram, Sita, Ravana, who is a demon king, comes and takes Sita captive. He abducts her and steals her away and takes her away from the camp of Ram and his brother and all the others. They come back and they realize that that deer had actually been a trick to lure them away from the campsite so that Sita could be abducted by Ravana, this demon king. At that point, Ram is beside himself, and eventually he enlists the help of Hanuman, the fourth name here, who is described often as a monkey with divine ancestry. So things get pretty interesting here. We have a monkey with divine ancestry. When you see representations of Hanuman, he very much looks like a monkey. He's got the tail and everything, but he can speak, and he also seems, in a sense, to be something like of a human-monkey kind of combination. If you could think of movies like Planet of the Apes and things like that, where you have sort of a hybrid between the apes and the humans, you have something of that kind of notion present with Hanuman. So Hanuman is kind of the monkey god, and you'll see pictures of him when you study kind of images of Hindu deities, and he is going to help Ram find where Ravana has taken Sita. He eventually is able to track them down, and he sees that Sita is being held captive, and Ravana is trying to seduce Sita. He's trying to have sex with her and to make her perhaps the queen of his kingdom. And Sita consistently rejects his advances. And interestingly, she will almost always focus on the notion of dharma. She will say, it is my dharma as a wife to remain faithful to Ram, and therefore she will not give in to the seduction of Ravana. Hanuman sees this. He goes back and tells Ram that she is remaining faithful. He takes Ram and his brother, the servants, all the monkeys following Hanuman with him, and they go and they have, of course, an epic battle. That's why we call these the epics. They're these great stories that have been put into movies and all kinds of things throughout history, because they are just great stories that are so entertaining and they are captivating. And of course, here they also teach us lessons about how to live. They have the big battle, and eventually the good guys win. Spoiler alert. Ram is able to defeat and kill Ravana. He is reunited with Sita, and they go back to the original kingdom where they are able to take over leadership, and Ram becomes the rightful king. There is an episode of The Office called Diwali, where eventually all the individuals in the office go with Kelly to a Diwali celebration. And at one point, they're all in the office, and Michael, if any of you have seen the show, asked Kelly to explain Diwali so that all of these non-Hindus will understand this festival that they are going to celebrate later that day. And Kelly says, oh, it's super neat. We get gifts, and I have a cool new kind of outfit to wear. And Michael says, oh, but could you explain some of the origins of the festival? And at this point, Dwight jumps up. If you've seen the show, you can picture Dwight jumping up. And he says, I'll take this, Michael. And then he very quickly says something like, Diwali is the celebration of the coronation of King Ram after his epic battle with Ravana. It symbolizes the struggle between good and evil. And very quickly, Michael says, shut up, Dwight. This isn't the Lord of the Rings. Right? And it's funny. Now, if you watch that episode again, hopefully what may have gone over your head the first time you saw it will now make sense, because Dwight is actually explaining the story of the Ramayana as the origin of the Diwali festival. The Diwali is the celebration of when Ram and Sita return, and Ram is coronated as the king of Ayodhya, that original kingdom, right? So this is the story, right? This story of the Ramayana has been celebrated and sung and acted out and danced to for 2,500 years, right? This is being composed shortly after the end of the Vedas, maybe around 300, 400, 500 BCE. And it has been celebrated by Hindus since that time. In the 1980s, there was a TV production of the Ramayana. Over all kinds of weeks, they would have weekly episodes. and they would be aired at a certain time. And at that time, much of India just shut down. Businesses closed. TVs were wheeled out into the streets so that everybody would have a chance to watch these episodes of the Ramayana. That's how beloved this text is to most Hindus. Again, not as authoritative technically as the Vedas. This is a Smrti text, not a Shruti text. And yet the average Hindu is going to know Hinduism much more so through the epics like the Ramayana than through the Vedas, because it is so accessible to the average Hindu. It's a story. And it may not teach us all about that wisdom of Atman and Brahman, but it does teach us how to live. It teaches us about good and evil. It teaches us about morality. And therefore, it teaches us how to make some spiritual progress. Hopefully someday, we'll be able to make that ultimate progress and experience moksha. But in this lifetime, hopefully by listening to the stories of the epics and the lessons that we learn, we can at least make some progress toward a better next life and continue our process toward ultimate liberation. So that's a little bit of the detail of the Ramayana. You can go to YouTube and look up some of the episodes from the 1980s version. There was also a version, I think, in 2006, more recently. You can watch some of the episodes or read the Ramayana. It is a very beloved story for most Hindus throughout history for what it teaches about Dharma and how to make a certain amount of progress from lifetime to lifetime. In the next video, we'll talk about the second epic, the Mahabharata, and focus specifically on one key portion of the Mahabharata known as the Bhagavad Gita.